This video is brought to you by Brilliant. Prior to Rishi Sunak taking office, the Conservatives had made a variety of commitments about the environment, including the commitment of net zero by 2050, a ban on the sale of new petrol and diesel cars by 2030, and the phasing out of gas boilers from 2035. However, while these may be the headline commitments made by the government, their actions this week have, to some, appeared to contrast them quite starkly. On Monday, the Prime Minister gave the green light to more North Sea drilling. So in this video, let's assess these claims and look into whether these new oil and gas licences do undermine the government's commitment to the environment and to net zero. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. It's worth starting this video by explaining exactly what oil and gas licences are, as they're often bandied around in the media without actually properly being explained. In essence, they're permission given by the government to companies to carry out certain activities in certain locations. Licences are given out by the North Sea Transition Authority in what are known as licensing rounds. These do not happen on a specific timescale. They're ad hoc and happen based on when permits end and when there's new scientific information about where can be drilled. The current round of licensing is the 32nd since the exploration of oil in the North Sea started in the 1970s. The last time there was a licensing round was back in 2020, when 113 permits were given out. Now, the way that permits work is that they, in essence, go up for auction for companies to bid on. Part of these bids include specifics on how companies will use the licence, so it isn't simply down to who will pay the most money. It should be noted that just because a company has a licence, it doesn't mean that they can just immediately start drilling. They first have to explore the area, and if they find oil and gas, then there are other hoops that they have to jump through in order to be given permission to start drilling. So that's briefly how the permits work. The only other thing to note here is that the reason that the last round of licences were handed out in 2020 is because the government paused them while they looked into whether such licences were compatible with their climate change goals. This culminated in a climate compatibility checkpoint for new oil and gas developments, something that was slammed by environmental activists. Freya Aitchison from Friends of the Earth Scotland went as far as to say that the UK government's supposed checkpoint is a worthless charade, as there can be no climate-compatible new oil and gas. While this statement was made last year in relation to the new checkpoint, others have effectively repeated this argument when discussing the latest round of new oil and gas licences. So before we flesh these arguments out further and look at Sunak's defence, let's first actually look through the new oil and gas licences up for grabs. In total, the Prime Minister has this week announced more than 100 new licences, which will seek to max out production of the North Sea's remaining oil and gas reserves. In an attempt to mitigate bad publicity, he's also announced 2 new carbon capture and storage clusters in Scotland and Northern England. There are currently 115 companies bidding for the new licences. Final decisions on these bids will be made in the autumn. Now, for his part, the Prime Minister has argued that these new licences will not undermine the UK's commitment to net zero emissions by 2050. In announcing new licences, Sunak argued that, even when we've reached net zero in 2050, a quarter of our energy needs will come from oil and gas. But there are those who would rather it come from hostile states than from the supplies we have here at home. The issue with this statement is that while the UK has imported gas from hostile states such as Russia, the vast majority comes from friendly countries. In 2021, Norway on its own, for example, made up about a third of our imported natural gas, equivalent to about 1.4 million metric tonnes a year. Russia accounted for only 3% of gas imports, at only 9,000 metric tonnes. And just to be clear, these are only imports. In total, imports of natural gas make up about 50%, with the other 50% coming from the UK's own sources, mainly from the North Sea. On the oil front, the situation looks similar. Again, Norway accounted for the vast majority of oil imports, with 11.7 million metric tonnes of crude oil coming from them alone. Russia accounted for only 9% of our oil imports in 2021. Since the start of the war in Ukraine, the UK has banned imports of fossil fuels from Russia. The Prime Minister also argued that in drilling for more gas and oil here in the UK, Britain will bolster its energy security and capitalise on that independence to deliver more affordable, clean energy to British homes and businesses. The issue here comes when we look at the amount of oil and gas exported from the UK. In total, about 60% of the UK's gas production is exported overseas. When we look at oil that is specifically produced in the North Sea, this figure rises to 80%. So it's reasonable to ask why we should believe that this new oil and gas produced in the North Sea will go towards improving energy security and reducing costs of energy for UK households, when it's entirely plausible that most of it will be exported from the UK to the highest bidder anyway. Unfortunately for the Prime Minister and the government, this isn't where the criticisms stop either. Sunak faced criticisms about the decision to issue new gas and oil licences from his own backbenchers, most notably from Chris Skidmore, who previously led an independent review of net zero. About this decision, he said that the UK was on the wrong side of history, and said that this happened at precisely the wrong time, when the rest of the world is experiencing record heat waves. Backbenchers weren't the only ones to voice criticism either. It seems that the Prime Minister had to defend his decision to his own daughters. He said that his daughters are rarely that bothered about my job, but they do ask him what he's doing to tackle climate change and protect the environment. He did admit that he thought he was confident that he would be able to win them over though, because they're not eco-zealots and are open to sensible, practical arguments. So, in summary, Sunak is arguing that this is a necessary step that needs to be taken to improve energy security. Opponents decry it as evidence that the government is uninterested in hitting this target. With Sunak so far behind in the polls right now, it's essential that he gets these sorts of calls right. Only time will tell whether this call on North Sea oil was indeed the right one. But you can make the correct call now, not least because it's increasingly difficult to tell what's real and fake, with AI and machine learning pushing us into new realms of deception. It's even easy to manipulate and deceptively use data. That's why, as part of our journalism at TLDR, we're brushing up on our data and analysis skills over on Brilliant. For instance, their Predicting with Probability course has helped us better understand how projections and forecasts work, and therefore help understand when there's something suspicious going on with government forecasting. Or take their hypothesis testing course, which allows us to better analyse people's claims and also testing our own assumptions and theories. It's not just statistics either. The interactive and engaging courses over at Brilliant take you through all kinds of important topics, from the worlds of maths, science and computer science. And as we all know, these are all increasingly important topics in our modern world, and all of these skills can definitely help with your educational journey or career path. So, to take a positive step in your learning, check out everything that Brilliant has to offer, free for a full 30 days by clicking the special link in the description. And the first 200 of you will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription.